Hey everybody, John here. I just wanted to do a quick entry into my video blog since I haven't done a video blog in a while, and I wanted to talk about the whole thing about Eddie Murphy getting selected to host the next Oscars. Now, before you've seen the title, I've got 3 problems with Eddie Murphy being selected to host the Oscars. Now, before I go into that, let me be clear here. I do have 3 problems with him doing it, but that doesn't mean I'm dead set against the fact that he's doing it. I think there could have been far worse choices than Eddie Murphy, and I think Eddie Murphy has some things going in his favor. Number one, he is a legitimate movie personality, and for any of you guys who have followed me for any period of time, you know that a big pet peeve of mine is when they get a TV personality to host the biggest night of the movie industry. I prefer having movie personalities host the Oscars. So, I mean, there's that. He was one of the greatest stand-up comedians of our generation for a period of time. I mean, he definitely has some things going for him, and I'm not completely against the idea of Eddie Murphy hosting the Oscars. But I do have 3 distinct problems. Problem number 1, and this has really nothing to do with Eddie Murphy. This is a problem I would have with almost anybody they pick to host the Oscars this year. I really think Billy Crystal should have hosted the Oscars this year. Now, hear me out as to why. Last year, the Oscars were an unmitigated disaster. I mean, it was just terrible as far as the hosting goes. I loved the idea of James Franco and Anne Hathaway hosting. I did. I loved the idea of it. I thought it was going to be great. But let's call a spade a spade. It was a train wreck. It was terrible. The whole show felt out of control and just in some kind of hallucinogen-induced fog. I mean, it was just terrible, except for when that one moment Billy Crystal came on stage. And it's like he owned it. It's like the Oscars was this car spinning wildly out of control, and then suddenly Billy Crystal came on set. He grabbed the show by the wheels, and suddenly the car steadied itself and was back in its own lane, just for that one brief moment in time. And because last year's Oscars were such a disaster, I think even just for 1 year, even if you never have him back again, I thought it was kind of important to this year right the ship, get the car back in its lane, just because last year was so bad. I didn't think this was the year to take a risk, and Eddie Murphy's a risk, but I didn't think this year, after such a horrible outing last year, was the year to take a risk as far as hosts go. And I really thought Billy Crystal, maybe even Steve Martin, should have been back to host just for this year, just so they got themselves settled back down again. But anyway, that's reason number 1. The second problem I had with Eddie Murphy being selected is, although he is a legitimate movie personality, and although he was, at one time, one of the greatest stand-up comedians of our generation, it's been a while since Eddie Murphy's been relevant. Now, notwithstanding the Oscar nomination that he got for Dreamgirls, that most people didn't even realize he got nominated for an Oscar for, notwithstanding all the rumors about all the nasty things he said about the Oscars and how he handled it when he did not win. I mean, notwithstanding a lot of the smaller family films he does, notwithstanding his terrific voice work in Shrek. But let's be honest, as a legitimate movie star, it's been a little while since Eddie Murphy's been relevant. And I think if you had announced Eddie Murphy was hosting the Oscars back in 1994, I think I really would have been on board, both guns blazing. But on its own, that's not something that can derail the whole thing. That's just a little thing. But the biggest problem I have with Eddie Murphy being selected, once again, is really not Eddie Murphy's fault. It's Brett Ratner. Let's call a spade a spade. Eddie Murphy was selected by Brett Ratner. Brett Ratner, who is, of course, directing Eddie Murphy in their upcoming film in November, Tower Heist. And Brett Ratner is also the producer of the Oscars this year. Let's call a spade. The only reason Brett Ratner picked who he picked was so it could help promote his own movie. If this was any other producer that was producing the Oscars this year, Eddie Murphy would not have been selected. I don't even think he would have been on the list of possible selectees. And let's face it, if Eddie Murphy were not in Tower Heist, Brett Ratner would not have picked him to be the host of the Oscars this year. This is a pretty self-serving move. And now, that by itself does not mean Eddie Murphy won't do a great job. Just in principle, it's a pretty damn shady, self-serving mood. So, my 3 problems with Eddie Murphy being selected as the host of the Oscars this year. 1, it really should have been Billy Crystal or somebody to right the ship. This was not the year to take a risk on hosts because of how bad last year was. Number 2, it's been a while since Eddie Murphy has been legitimately relevant. And number 3, this is really shady. Brett Ratner becomes the producer of the Oscars, and suddenly he's putting in a guy that he has in his movie that's coming out close to the Oscars. That's really shady and underhanded, and I just don't like the way it's gone on. That doesn't mean I don't think Eddie Murphy could do terrific. I think there is potential that Eddie Murphy could do a terrific job, and I'm very curious to see how he does. It's just that he wouldn't have been my pick. Let's see how he goes. Anyway, thanks for watching my video blog. I'm John Campea.